Okay, so this workshop is about themes, topics, and research. So first, let's introduce a little bit about NHD in case you don't already know. So National History Day is a competition where you conduct research on a historical topic related to the annual theme. And the theme this year is rights and responsibilities, which we'll get into later. Then you'll create a documentary, exhibit, paper, performance, website, or another category using your research. And then you'll create some written materials, which are the process paper and annotated bibliography. So if you want to look more, at least for San Diego, you can go to sites.google.com/NHD San Diego. If you live somewhere else, then you can also just search up National History Day and then your area, and you should get some site that pops up. So here are some important dates to keep in mind. So registration. Registration begins January 6th and ends January 24th. So if you miss that, you'll have to pay an extra late fee. So you should just keep in mind that you'll have to do it within those like 2.5 weeks. And student waivers are due on January 15th. And then historical papers are a little bit different. So historical papers, instead of like registering on your county's website, you have to directly register with the state National History Day, California. And then submitting. So after you register, you'll make your project and then you'll submit. So again, for papers, it's a little bit different. Papers are due 3 days earlier on February 9th, and they have to be uploaded at nhdca.org. Then on February 12th, all of the other categories upload all of their materials and supporting documents, and the websites are not allowed to be edited after this date. Then there are actually 3 levels of competition. So the first is a county competition. Anyone can do this one as long as they register, and that's on March 1st. On May 2nd to 4th is the state competition. So if you place in the top like 5 in your category at the county competition, they'll send you to the state competition and you'll be able to compete again. Then the top 2 for each category at the state competition will get the opportunity to compete at the national competition on June 12th. So that's the goal for all of you guys. Now I'll let Nicole talk about the theme.
This year's theme is rights and responsibilities, as I'm sure you're all aware. And so there's a few questions that you want to think about when you're doing your initial research about different events that could pertain to the theme. These are the relationships between rights and responsibilities, how they have or they could evolve over time and affect each other. And so based on these questions, there's a video that NHD put out that we're going to preview really quickly, so that way we can continue to talk about it with a basis and a background.
The theme for National History Day in 2025 is Rights and Responsibilities in History. It is a broad theme that allows students to choose topics from family, local, national, or world history. While the theme may appear straightforward at first glance, it is actually quite complex. In today's world, we often hear discussions about my rights or our rights. While individuals have the right to freedoms such as free speech, they also have a responsibility to exercise these freedoms in a manner that respects the rights and well-being of others. This understanding of rights and responsibilities is crucial for the greater good of all. Therefore, the NHD theme for 2025 focuses on both historical rights and responsibilities. Projects must address both aspects. Before students choose their topics, it is important to break down the theme and analyze its parts. Rights are freedoms or privileges that individuals possess as human beings or as citizens of a society. They are often, though not always, protected by laws, charters, or constitutions that establish the boundaries of personal freedoms, or rights, and protections and obligations, or responsibilities. Responsibilities refer to what is expected of individuals as members of society. These include laws, social norms, or ethical principles designed to promote the well-being of society as a whole. The concepts of rights and responsibilities have a long and interesting history. Their impact on societies has changed significantly over time, depending on where and when people lived and what they believed. In the present day, we can examine rights and responsibilities in history to learn how members of society valued things, how they treated each other, and what they thought was important for people's health and happiness. Researching how people thought about rights and responsibilities in the past can also uncover important information regarding their ideas about religion, philosophy, and government. To make meaning of rights and responsibilities in history, we need to ask some important questions. Who gets to decide who has rights? Do all people have the same rights? Why were certain rights created? To whom were they given, and why? Who is responsible for holding people accountable for providing and ensuring the established rights? To explore the relationship between rights and responsibilities, trace their complex histories, and ask more questions, let's look at some examples. One of the earliest known legal codes was the Code of Hammurabi, created in Mesopotamia around 1754 BCE. It is an example of how rulers can communicate messages about rights and responsibilities to their subjects. In the present day, we can ask, why was it created? Who was its intended audience? How did the Code of Hammurabi influence later laws and ideas about rights and responsibilities? Nearly 3 millennia later and across the globe, the Aztecs, who lived in present-day Mexico, created the Codex Mendoza. How do its painted images depict the history of the Aztecs and their conquest by the Spanish? In what way does it depict and define gender roles within the context of rights and responsibilities? When considering rights and responsibilities in history, we must consider multiple perspectives. During World War II, high school student Frances Cesano wrote an essay while she was incarcerated at Amache concentration camp in Colorado. Reflecting on her incarceration, Frances opened her essay and asked, "Why does this have to happen anyway?" As historians, we can expand on Frances's question and ask, how does the account of this one student reflect the broader impact of incarceration on Japanese American communities? How does the story of Frances Cesano and other Japanese Americans challenge our understanding of rights and responsibilities within American democracy? To effectively address the theme of rights and responsibilities in history, it is necessary to determine its significance in history. In 1964, volunteers from across the United States launched the Freedom Summer Project in Mississippi, advocating for voting rights and education. Volunteers, including local activist Fannie Lou Hamer, led efforts to create freedom schools, register black voters, and establish the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Despite facing violent opposition, their actions are a crucial moment in civil rights history and America's quest for equality. Why did volunteers feel responsible for aiding Mississippians? What rights were these civil rights activists fighting for? How were activists exercising their civic responsibilities? Widely researching rights and responsibilities in history means exploring a range of available sources and then putting those sources in conversation. For example, the 20-point position paper, which demanded Native American rights be honored according to government-passed treaties, was just one outcome of the American Indian Movement, a grassroots effort led by Native Americans living in Minnesota's Twin Cities. This document, presented to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and President Richard Nixon in 1972, is part of a broader continuum of Native American activism that spans centuries. It highlights ongoing struggles for sovereignty, self-determination, and recognition of treaty rights. What responsibilities did the American Indian Movement believe they had towards Native Americans in Minnesota? Were these impacts felt in other states? When cooperating with the American Indian Movement, what responsibilities did the government have in upholding legal agreements made with Native Americans? Successful National History Day projects place a topic in historical context and include an argument that is supported by analysis and evidence. The process of building an argument begins with looking and making observations and continues with offering reflections and posing questions to direct further research. During World War I, the Army Corps of Engineers' wartime involvement reached unprecedented levels. Their tasks ranged from building railways, ports, barracks, and hospitals to creating maps. The Corps needed to recruit service members with specialized skill sets. Let's look at a series of recruitment posters aimed specifically at convincing eligible members to enlist in the Army Corps of Engineers. One titled U.S. Army Engineers for Engineering shows members engaged in highly skilled engineering tasks. Beyond their uniforms and a large steamship in the background, nothing in the image indicates any form of physical combat. By contrast, another boldly states, "First in emergencies," and portrays a very different scene. Here, a soldier is shown running alongside newly constructed railroad tracks with a weapon in hand in front of a large group of other soldiers. These advertisements seem to target different groups of potential enlistees. How do they reflect the historical context in which they were created? Are citizens responsible for serving their nation in a time of war? What rights do citizens have to choose how they serve? Based on this example, what argument could you make about the actions of the Army Corps of Engineers? How did they address rights and responsibilities in history? Rights and responsibilities are universal, spanning from ancient history to early American history and continuing into the present day across the globe. They are relevant in both wartime and peacetime and are negotiated by both individuals and collectives. As you begin your research, consider what lesser-known unexpected stories could you find that address rights and responsibilities in history, especially in your local history. Do you see your ancestors or other local figures creating new opportunities for themselves and their communities? How do their experiences help tell a larger story of rights and responsibilities in history? We cannot wait to see what new stories you uncover in your 2025 National History Day projects.
So that's the official NHD video on the theme for this year. So that was a lot of stuff, and they went through a bunch of really good examples that some of you might want to do projects on. But now we'll go through some more detailed examples that I and Nicole actually used last year, as well as explain more on those topics.
The theme for National...
So these are the definitions that they used. What are rights and responsibilities? So rights are freedoms or privileges that individuals possess as human beings or citizens of a society. So that's both civil, political, social, economic, and human rights. So an example of a civil right or political right, is voting rights. Once you turn 18, as a citizen of the United States, you are legally allowed to vote. So you have the right to decide what happens in your community. And at the same time, there's responsibilities. So there are expectations of individuals as members of society. So what they're really looking for, though, is responsibilities of these rights that are given to the people. So for example, you have the right to vote. So people expect you to use that right responsibly and vote for what will be best for the community or yourself. So the question and answers should be open on Zoom. So if you'd like to just really quickly write, what are some rights and responsibilities that you know about? I'm going to also open up the chat because that's probably going to be easier for a lot of you. Oops. So some rights that we have besides the right to vote is the right to free speech. So we're allowed to talk about issues that we care about. And actually I have a couple of examples on the next page. So you also have the freedom of religion. So that means that you can practice whatever religion you want. You also have the right to protest. So if you want to, you can go out on the streets and hold some signs and protest. The only responsibility along with that is to protest peacefully. Yeah, so someone in the chat said the freedom of the press. So as long as they're not defaming anyone or like advocating for harm, newspapers are allowed to post whatever they want. So that's called freedom of the press. So where the government is not allowed to like take down any newspapers for what they say. So now let's get into choosing a topic, and I'll let Nicole take over this section.
Okay, when choosing a topic, which I'm sure you're all already thinking about, there are 4 things that you want to consider, which I know the video briefly touched on, but we're going to expand upon those. So the first is context. Having a background is extremely important. You want to make sure that you are sufficiently contextualizing the issue so that later on you can connect it to your big impacts, which we'll talk about in a second, and also connect it to the theme. Again, we'll talk about that. Keeping these things in mind, though, you want to make sure that your project and your topic is specific enough. This is going to have to do a lot with how you research and how you choose to research and the types of sources that you look at. But if your project is too specific, you'll be unable to appropriately connect your theme or your topic to the theme, and demonstrate how your event actually did impact a right for a group of people and then a responsibility for another group of people. But if you make it too broad, then it might be hard to demonstrate to your judges or whoever is viewing your project how exactly your event connected to that. So then keeping in mind context and specificity, if you look at impact and connection, these are going to be your short-term and long-term impacts, either directly from your event, indirectly from your event, and then how they impacted a group's rights or a group's responsibilities based on the definitions that were in the video and that we gave earlier. To demonstrate this in a more tangible way, the National History Day website has created this little acronym called BALANCE. This might help you as you're visualizing and sort of creating your project structure. You want to think of background, which is going to be your context, a right or change or effects, which are going to be like your connection to the theme and your impacts, and then things like actions, leaders, new perspectives. These are going to be your event, and then also your multiple perspectives, which are super important when you're considering a unbiased, neutral, historical telling of a certain event. So here are a few examples of some topics that I know William did last year, which demonstrate context, specificity, impact, and connection.
Yeah, so the project we did last year was a documentary, so basically a 10-minute video about a historical event. And what we chose was the Lemon Grove incident. So basically, a school was illegally segregated back in the 1930s, and they actually managed to get it resegregated. And the reason this was important and a turning point, which was the theme, is because this was actually the first time a school had been desegregated. At the time, segregation was actually illegal in California. So that's actually a little bit of context. But another bit of context is that the Lemon Grove incident took place in the 1930s. So that is during the Great Depression. So a lot of people wanted to like deport not like other people to ensure jobs for themselves. So that's some important context because given that these people were being segregated and they decided to fight back, maybe some people would be really mad at them and decide to try to get them deported. Then some specificity. The project focused on one specific case, which is the Lemon Grove incident, rather than a collection of cases. So some more cases about school desegregation are famously Brown versus Board and Mendez versus Westminster. But rather than look at all 3 of those, since we're looking for a turning point, we decided to focus on just one. And the impact or an effect of this incident is that today all schools are desegregated. So segregation is now illegal in like everywhere throughout America. So that's a really big impact. And the connection to the theme is that the case was a turning point because it was the first time a school had been desegregated when it had like been segregated due to race. Also, this was they were segregating Mexican Americans from the other pupils at school. And the second example So this is the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is considered to have ended World War II. So if you haven't learned about that, World Wars are definitely like a really big event that you might want to do about rights and responsibilities. So here's how it related to the theme. So specificity, the project focused on a specific event, which were these two separate bombings, as opposed to various battles of the war in general. So instead of saying World War II did this, they said these bombings did this, and the impact and effect. So this actually directly caused a change in the laws of war regarding citizens. So before, the basic strategy of war was to literally bomb citizens until the government decided we can't take any more of this, and then decide to lose the war. So obviously this is pretty unethical because these citizens have done absolutely nothing wrong. And that's part of the reason why today bombing citizens intentionally is considered a really bad war crime. And another impact or effect of these bombings is that there were massive strides in both atomic weaponry and our understanding of physics. So you would be able to actually expand on that. You don't have to say this changed one thing. You can say it changed multiple things. And I'd argue that's actually a better thesis. And here's the connection to the theme. So this was a turning point because the laws of war were directly changed in light of ethical conduct for citizens. Now I'll let Nicole get back to the research process.
So when you're considering research, which you're all going to have to do at some point, there are a few things that you want to consider. First, you want to think about how you should go about looking through certain sources. And then with that, you're going to probably come across different kinds of sources, which will be helpful to define. So the first thing that you want to consider is how to make your project specific enough. In order to do this, you're going to want to create a focused research question. So this is going to be a question that is narrow enough that it'll steer your research and hopefully shape your thesis or your historical argument in a way that's able to be connected to the theme easily and then to your short-term and long-term impacts. But it's also going to be broad enough for that so that it's easy for the judges to see exactly how its impact is relevant today. Again, if you make it too narrow, it'll be hard to find sources that directly correlate with your theme, or excuse me, your topic. An example of this was actually from my project last year. Again, the theme was turning points in history, and I did my project on the Seneca Falls Convention, which was the first women's rights convention in the United States. One thing that happened at that convention was the publishing of the Declaration of Sentiments. And so the specific research question that I had, which I think really helped my project as a whole, was I asked how the language of the Declaration of Sentiments contributed to its influence on the suffrage movement largely, and the passing of the 19th Amendment, which was the amendment that guaranteed women the right to vote. And so by taking a very specific feature of the Seneca Falls Convention, I was able to connect it to the larger movement that has impacts that can be seen today. And then once you have created your focused research question, you're probably going to start some research and you're going to come across both primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are the sources that were written at the time of the event by either people directly involved or closely associated. They can include essays, documents, photos, letters, just really anything that's directly pertinent. But importantly, they are pretty much one-sided. So this is where secondary sources come in because they can retell, analyze, evaluate, summarize, comment on your primary sources. They'll also probably be helpful because the language will probably be more approachable since they were not written at the time of the event. And by people who were not directly involved. So they can also help provide a more like unbiased and neutral perspective, which is really important when you're looking at historical projects. So you're going to want to include in your NHD project to make it strong, both primary sources so that you can have direct source material and secondary source material that'll help you explain those primary sources in connection to your topic. So primary source used is kind of hard because they were written at the time of the event, so the language can be dense or maybe even different from how we speak currently. And also they only offer one perspective because they're usually just snapshots of certain moments in history. So when you come across a primary source, you're going to want to sort of take what it says with a grain of salt. And your readings of these should prompt additional research and also should prompt you to seek secondary sources for further understanding and contextualization. One tool that you can use when you're looking at primary source is this analysis tool, which requires you to observe, reflect, and question. So the observe is going to be asking questions about the surface level details, just making sure that you generally understand what it's saying. This will prompt you to do some reflection about what it could mean for your focused research question, for the topic as a whole, for the connection to the theme, or for the short-term or long-term impacts. Then, once you've done some initial observation and reflecting, hopefully this will prompt you to ask further questions, which might prompt you to look at either additional primary sources or even some secondary sources to help you gain even more insight and context that will help you answer your focused research question. Here is an example which I will let William explain, and it uses that same analysis tool.
Yeah, so this is one of the primary sources that I used in my project. So this was called the Bliss Bill. So it was a bill that was introduced to the state assembly, and basically what it tried to do is legalize the segregation of basically non-Americans. So firstly, what I want you to observe is the time period. So see how the date says January 9th, 1931. So this is like about 2 weeks after the Lemon Grove incident started. So that implies that maybe this has some relation with the boycott. And then let's reflect on why this was made. So the bill was probably made to legally segregate the Mexican American students, even if they ended up winning the court case where they were like fighting against the school district. So the intended audience was the state assembly, and basically the goal of this bill is to pass this into state law. So that means now this is a law and now they can enforce it. So this is really important because it displays some adversity that the students faced, not just from the boycott or not being able to go to school, but like just outside of their like control. So then here are some questions that would inspire further research. So what happened to this bill? Did it end up passing? And why or why not? So in our documentary, this source was used to demonstrate movements against the integration, so desegregation, of the Lemon Grove Grammar School, as the bill is theorized by Balderrama to have been created partially in an attempt to legalize its segregation. And here's how you might be able to use secondary sources. So secondary sources are another tool that can be used to help understand primary ones. So usually they'll refer to a variety of primary sources, and they'll contain the following things. So content, what was the author's relation to or knowledge about the event? Context, what other concurrent events could have influenced the author's account? And consequences, how was the event described in the primary source account important in the long run? So on the left, we have a picture of the Library of Congress website on the Declaration of Independence draft. So reading this, you can get a really good overview of what is this draft, why is it important, without having to do a bunch of research yourself. And here's the example secondary source that I used in my documentary. So this is a book written by Balderrama in defense of La Raza. So basically, here's the content. Balderrama's book details the Mexican community's activities inside and outside of America during 1929 to 1936. So that's pretty important because the event in our documentary, the Lemon Grove incident, happened in the middle of that time period. And some context. Actually, a lot of major events happened during this time period. So, for example, there was the Great Depression, and that peaked in 1931. And there was also Mexican repatriation, which was very correlated to that, and also peaked at the same time. And those ended up both being factors in the Lemon Grove case. And here's some consequences. So Balderrama's book covers a lot of different events, and importantly, one of them is the Bliss Bill. So he kind of explains the motive behind Mr. Bliss writing this bill, and it also explains that it didn't pass, which was a major step forward for the desegregation of schools. So in our documentary or in our research, we use this source to figure out the timeline of the Bliss Bill and how it was eventually like struck down. And we related this to the lemon grove case by demonstrating the immediate consequences of the incident, which was the failure of this bill to pass and its impact. So now let's practice with some primary sources. So on the left, I have this primary source, which was a drawing of a historical caricature of the Cherokee Nation. So if you can, I'd like you to put in the chat what you observe about this image, or maybe if you know anything about this event, what it was in some context. So I'll start you off. We can see on the arm that's closest to the screen, it says lands in Alabama and Arkansas, and they're being tied down by some people. So that probably symbolizes how the Cherokee Nation's lands in Alabama and Arkansas were being like controlled by other people. So I'll give you guys like a minute to write in the chat if you see anything that you really think is important. Okay, so some more things. Okay, wait, let's see. Yeah, so they're European looking people. Yeah, so basically the Americans of the past decided to like get rid of the Cherokees, or like the Europeans of the past decided to get rid of the Cherokee Nation and like basically steal all of their land, which is a very bad thing. Um so yeah, that's a really important observation because it tells you who was involved in this event, and maybe what they did with this, or you can now research, hey, what happened afterwards? So reliability and relevance. So a good source should be reliable and relevant. So reliability is a source's credibility, trustworthiness, and accuracy. So credibility is basically how well can the person who made this primary source be believed, or secondary source. And accuracy is like, how accurate is it? It's like, is this historically accurate? Does it fit with the events of the time? Did this person do the research well? And trustworthiness is this kind of like from a reputable source? You wouldn't want to go to any .com or like even like a well-known newspaper and get your source from there. You should use really good, well-established sources like the Library of Congress or any like .gov website. So for example, the National Park Service would be a fine source to use. And then relevancy. So a source should also be relevant. So it needs to be directly applicable to your project and it needs to be useful in answering your research question. So going back to like the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, something that's relevant is maybe like the Geneva Conventions, which are basically rules of war or Geneva Conventions, and something that's not relevant would be like agriculture in the United States. Like, sure, you could make some arguments about how agriculture increased in the United States, but that agriculture increased in the United States because of the war requiring more materials, but that doesn't really have anything to do with like ethics or laws. So that would not be a good source. Additionally, like not all relevant sources will be reliable. So even if something seems to support your argument really well, you should still really make sure that it's correct. So for other tools that might help you with choosing a topic and also research, here's a document from National History Day that was made in collaboration with the Library of Congress. So if you just search, it's probably pretty hard to get this link from here, but if you just search up Finding, Analyzing, and Constructing History, a research guide by the Library of Congress and National History Day, you should be able to find this. So now let's open it up to some Q&A. So if you have any questions about basically anything in NHD, like how to submit your project or some more deadlines, feel free to to ask in the Q&A. Yeah, so how do you submit a project? So look at your county's and the National History Day website, and they'll give you more details. So for San Diego, they actually tell you to use this form, and then so when you register, you'll actually like put your name, the title of your project, and like I think what you hope it's going to be about, as well as your team members, which you can have up to four. And then afterwards, they'll direct you when you like during the submission period, they'll direct you to another form, and you'll upload your documents there. If you don't have any questions, you're also free to leave. Yeah, so if you want updates from NHD, I think you can subscribe to their mailing list and they'll actually be able to send you emails. So if you just need to make sure you're getting your deadlines and you're not missing anything, then I would suggest doing that. As far as updates go, I think they don't really communicate all that much unless there's some major changes. But you will be updated if you advance to like the next levels of competition as well. How many resources do we need? I don't think there's actually a technical lower bound, but like most people aim for like 2 pages of primary and secondary sources. Do you need a partner of the same school and grade? You do not. You can partner with basically anyone you want. I think um, you should probably make sure they're in the same division as you. So you should make sure they're in the same division. So if so, there's like two divisions, like fourth through eighth grade and then ninth through 12th. So if you compete in the ninth through 12th and you want to partners in the fourth through eighth, I think you'll have to compete in the senior division. So that'd be pretty disadvantageous. But other than that, but there's no actual restrictions on who your partner can be. So yeah, you do not need a partner. There's also individuals, and these are actually separate categories. So that way it's more fair. One person isn't competing against like five. If you can't find primary sources, yeah, this was a pretty big issue for projects like before probably like the 1700s, especially if you're making a documentary. So if you can't find primary sources, I would suggest maybe trying finding a different medium for your project. And if you really can't find any primary sources, I think then you should probably just choose a different topic because the judges will grade you based on your historical accuracy. So if there's like no primary sources for your topic, then that'd be not really graded well. Um, yeah.
Also, there's the Library of Congress has a ton of primary sources, even in the form of images. So if you haven't already, I would really recommend looking there because it's good to have as many sources as possible to contextualize your issue. You also could be looking too narrowly if that might be something to consider.
Okay, we'll probably wrap up this session at 5:45 in 5 minutes. So if you have any more questions, please get them in before then, but I will end the meeting at 5:45. Yes, so you can get a lot of information online. So again, there's going to be your county website for National History Day, and there's also going to be your the state website. So yeah, I can like visit some of these resources if you want, and you can see all of the information that they have. So for example, this is a lot of stuff, and it'll go through like basically everything that you need. So things like this, I think this is like how you're supposed to use primary sources, and it goes through a bunch of different types of primary sources and how you can use them. And then if we go back to like here, for example, so this is the my county's National History Day website. I just type that in. Then you can see there's a lot of stuff. There's an introduction video. Actually, this is us. So if you want to join, you should join. And there's important dates, all of these, and then a bunch of support and also extra resources.
There are example projects too there if you ever are
Yeah.
stuck and want some help or inspiration.
Yeah, so if we go here, you could see, let's go to Frontiers in History. Oh, it doesn't give you the actual project. Yeah, sure, I can send this link. Here, I'll just send it to everyone. And then, yeah, I'll send the link to the um primary sources guide as well. But these the San Diego website is specific to San Diego, so your county almost definitely has different rules that you should follow. And here's actually the graphic organizer as well. Is there a lot of writing required? Not really. I think the process paper is 500 words. The hardest part is honestly the annotated bibliography, but there's not a lot of words. It's mostly just like finding your sources and making sure they're properly formatted. We will have a workshop on writing the annotated bibliography and process paper later, so we will probably email everyone here about that workshop based on the email list. So if you'd like to join that one, you can. Let me think about writing.
It depends on your medium, right?
Yeah,
Because if you're
sorry,
making a
let me get into
paper or
that.
something,
Yeah, so we did a documentary. Did you do a paper actually, Nicole?
I made a website.
You made a website. That's actually a little bit of writing as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, it mostly depends on your medium. An exhibit will have mostly printing out like primary sources and a description, which isn't that much writing. A paper will obviously be a ton of writing. It'll be, I think, 1,500, 2,500 words. So that will take quite a while. And it does have to be like really well written. Um, how long does this take you guys? It does take quite a while. Honestly, I can't speak for the other mediums since I've only done documentaries, but I did look at, or sorry, A documentary does take a long time to track down a bunch of images to use. Depending on the time period, though, it might be easier. If you did a really recent event from like 1970s, that would all be a lot easier because there's like moving videos and stuff that you can use. The research process also takes probably quite a while, depending on how deeply you go into your topic. So, like, we probably researched Lemon Grove Incident for quite a while. We actually like visited the town ourselves because it was pretty close by and looked at their archives, which took like a couple of weeks. And then to look at the contextualization, a lot more since we had to research the Great Depression, Mexican repatriation, and a lot of other things. So, Nicole, how long did it take you?
I did a website, and because NHD has its own like website maker situation, there was a bit of a learning curve. So that took a while, like formatting it itself. But the research process, I would say, also took me quite a while. So I would say start early rather than later. Many,
Yeah,
many
there
weeks.
definitely is a learning curve. Like especially with like making documentaries, because you have to figure out how to make music, how to do the voiceover, how to properly transition between images. If you want to scroll text, how to do that. Luckily my sister had taken like a video editing class in school, which is why I didn't really include that in my time estimate. But yeah, if you're new, then you will definitely need to learn how to use a video editing software. Okay, it's 5:47. If there's any last minute questions, please put them in the chat. If not, I'm going to end the meeting now, and I hope to see you in future webinars or even in more programs that we're hoping to do, like a mentorship program. Others, are you allowed to get outside help? Yes, absolutely, you are. You're actually encouraged to. So for my project, we actually went to the archives at Lemon Grove and we got help from the archivist there, who was actually amazing and like helped us with all of the archive stuff, was a like really professional archivist. So yeah, you're definitely allowed to get outside help. For like writing your actual like paper or making your documentary, pretty sure no. But for the research, yeah, you're definitely encouraged to get help. And you should always also like acknowledge them in your process paper and maybe even give a reference if you like interviewed people. Okay, it looks like there's no more questions, so thank you everyone for coming, and I hope to see you in future workshops. Good luck with your projects.